Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depends on where you are. Today, the team asked me to speak about somebody who became a friend, Mr. Han from Self-Portrait. We met in New York, and then after we saw each other in London, where he lived. And we also saw ourselves in Hong Kong for a lecture that I made with him, that we make together on his demands on the Hong Kong Fashion Board. When I was in Hong Kong for a lecture about design and light design. This was a funny way of meeting. The first time, he asked the production in New York, at Edward and Alex and the team and Maddie and all the rest, to follow up a production. The concept was made by another person, and it was some kind of art installation, between bracket, designed by Madame Nyan Fish. What is very interesting is that Mrs. Nyan Fish was the art director of a group of communication and PR and production called KCD. And she was the one who have asked me in the 90s to come to meet them in Milan and to work for and with them as art director and as light designer. Basically, we made this installation in a garage with a lot of furnitures accumulated, painted in white. Was it quite interesting? The second presentation we made, that she designed also, was everything was plexiglass. Was interesting. But for me, there was something already twisted between the will of a brand. I was not understanding this brand to be inside this kind of set. It was the way it is. So in our work, we have to produce, we have to make. And if an art director is saying, this is what I want, and if the designer who knows the brand as DNA said, fine, let's do that, then they must be right. And my point of view is not the north, is not the real direction. I always think that when people tell me, you're so lucky you do what you want, and I say, no, I'm not, absolutely not. My feeling of responsibility again, on the shoulder, is this trust between a designer or brand and us and I, is about what can be the more accurate for them. So basically, I'm not doing what I want, I'm doing what I think can be the coherency between an image and a brand. And this coherency, how they can develop it to a lot of different direction as the lookbook, and the advertising, and even the windows or the shop. So it goes from this element, which is a head of the show, a head of selling, to this global image of a brand as an obsession, as a dedication. What can be a projection in a set, in a shape, in proportion, which material can be perfectly matched into a moment of a brand too, because the brand evaluated either with the one who created the brand, either with a new designer coming. And this is also a very interesting exercise when you have a brand and you have different designers coming. To come back to Han, we arrived to one time, there was the set built for the third presentation, and he was not happy of it at all. And with Han, Mr. Tu, who is a bit his body, taking care of all the communication and marketing, living in LA, Tu was not happy at all. So they turned back to me and say, what can we do? So we change things. We make a huge balloon behind to make a wide circle in the axis of the photos. And the audience could also have this kind of circle in front of them. Han was very happy, and when I was in London, he said, let's have a lunch together. So we began to have a lunch together. He was expecting, I guess, that we were having lunch and talk about fashion, etc. And I was coming asking him, what are you doing? Why are you doing? What is your projection? And he began to explain to me the fluidity of woman, the love he has from the shape and the fabrics, the prints, how they mix the print. And then we went after the lunch to have a coffee in his home. And his home was in concrete. A very strange home in London, and was in a little street. You arrived to the little house, and this house was all in concrete. So I went to begin to think that there was a real parallel who creates an emphasis of his fluidity of collection to work on what we call in architecture the brutalism. And I begin to talk to him to say, well, take a pen and write it. Why don't we work on brutalism? Why don't we try to twist brutalism? How would you do that? And I begin to draw a set which was almost falling, looking like pieces of concrete, one on the top of the other. And on the top of that, there would be a full concert black piano with a pianist gently playing the music for the shows, and the model will be around. He was doubting about it. And he began to, and I was sure about it. I was sure that on my side, the best I could give. And after thinking about that, he began to think that it could really work. So we made it in New York. And it was a very nice success because his fluidity of dress, turning, which made the fabric moving, everybody around could have different kind of shots. The set with his angle, creating also different lights, shadows, and the kind of specific photos for each of the guests. After that, he said, yeah, that's a very interesting direction. What can we do? So I begin to work on another set, always where you have this feeling that it can fall, as if a millimeter more, or during the show, all the set can fall, almost voluntary. And we make a second one, which was the ceiling, and the ceiling was bending. So the model arriving in front of the ceiling created a different feeling of proportion because of the height of the space and the air on the top of the head with a concrete floor. That works also very well. And he began to really think about brutalism as a frame of reflecting the delicateness and the elegance of his creation. Made on that, we spoke and we made a third one and a fourth one. One was 4 doors, but the doors, open of the door, the frame of the doors, they were in the middle of the runway and on the stage and they were not really stable. You had the feeling again that there was inside this brutalism, fragility. And without explaining it, without saying, this is the way we should do, without saying, this is the message we want to share with you, audience, we succeed by making the fact that people feel it. And when you feel it, it goes even deeper inside you, and you have this momentum of emotion, which is the goal of every show. So after doing in this direction, we went to say, okay, can we use fabric, which is fluid? I'm normally not really happy to make fabric, to show fabric. We are showing dresses mostly in fabric, and some in leather, but mostly in fabric. And then you have a set in fabric. For me, there is some kind of opposition, but some fabric make you think about something else, as a painting canvas. The linen painting canvas is immediately in your head a connection with art. And with minimalism art, it could be the Italian art, it could be Lucio Fontana cut, it could be also the frame before to paint. So these ancestors, these related thoughts and image to a set and a material make us made kind of fabric doors. So the door is something which is supposed to be hyper solid, but the fabric is something which is very fluid. So having the models going through these doors, which were in angle, creating in the axis a perfect photo, but on the side, again, very different Instagram images and social media images, was pretty a lovely set. And the collection works very well. During that time, he opened his first shop in London. And the shop, he was saying, I want to do the shop, and I want to open my shop. So I put him in contact with an architect, a young architect in London that I really respected, and who was the one working for Celine. And so they met together, and they really works, and then they go in the direction of the brutalism, and they create the shape of their first shop, which is now totally developed in China, i.e. and in Asia, with elements. Because the logic of Han, it's very smart. Not only he is hyper talented, but also he has this target and this real little world. And in the world, I don't say little by a judgment, I just say that in the whole universe, he's got his direction. And that direction on this opposition of fluidity to brutalism and fluidity fabric to material as concrete or as vertical repetition bars, and these poles side to side create a rhythm when you walk around in the shop and you see through and not through, create the kind of attraction to what is suspended here, which are his creation. After that, we made one show with on the demand of two to try to make a lot of benches, and all the benches would be one color of green, who was one color important in the collection. Basically, I think that if the seats are very important, and it is also something that should be relevant and connected to the brand, it's also the first thing which is covered by the audience. So it's something that doesn't exist in the photos and in the videos. So most of the time I say it's a second thing. The first has to be the grand image. The second has to be the seat. And there is, everything has to be in a perfect coherence. After making that show, as they wanted, I was just more focused on the lighting due to the demand, because when I do not agree, it doesn't mean I'm right again. So I just walk back and do the best we can to succeed in what the designers and his team wishes. I told him we should begin to go in some kind of historical building. We should begin to go in a place where we have also reflections. What do you mean? And so the team scouts a lot of historical spaces in Manhattan. And for once, because the show is on the weekend, we've been able to rent the ground floor of one of the oldest building in Manhattan, which was the Woodworth building. And the ground floor of the Woodworth building has a staircase going down. And so we put all the backstage downstairs, and part of the audience was around this exit of the stairs, and part was going on the other part of the ground floor. But when you have the model coming out of the stairs, walking up, when you see the head, then the face, then whole face, then the dress, and then when arriving up, it reflecting the marble on the floor. When you light it properly, it begins to be suddenly hyper poetic and hyper aesthetic and really sharp. Here, the stairs was the brutalism kind of, because they have a ceiling on the top of the stairs, so you create also an angle of view who was hyper interesting to make emphasis the beauty of his creation. So the way the models walk all around, the way we decided finally on the second part of the stairs with all the models up to down, creating a beautiful final image for, again, the Instagram, was a very beautiful success. With Han, we see several times in London, and we spoke about the evolution of the shop, the evolution of the image of the brand, and we have a lot of relation, i.e. the one I was speaking about Hong Kong. Knowing that he was based also in Hong Kong and Mother China, I went to let him know that I was going to make this lecture in Hong Kong about lighting, specifically in design and architecture, invited by the Hong Kong Design Board. I've refused a lot, and it was like 2 years ago, and I said, well, it's maybe time to share what I've learned, if it could be helpful for others. When he heard about that, he said, would you accept to make something with fashion with me? I said, well, a friend is a friend, you can't refuse. Han is somebody we always have fun. He's taking very seriously what he's doing. At the same time, he don't take himself seriously, which I think for me is one of the ultimate intelligence. Because if you begin to take yourself seriously and your work seriously, there's some kind of gravity arriving there. And when he's working with all this fluidity, you need to have humor to also breathe. And we had this speech with a lady journalist, very lovely fashion lady journalist, and I think we were laughing all the time. I don't know if it was useful, but we had a very good moment together. The last show we made was thinking of having, how do you have the feeling of brutalism in a more broken line of shows, to have the people seeing the models turning, but also sitting on one place. They can see several models, so on the top, up on the other audience. So there is this kind of masterized chaos that we were trying to achieve. And for that, there was some very long work of drawing how we can make the seat on risers to really create a feeling of chaos, post-destruction. So the production scouts several spaces and find one who was really matching to this with the columns in concrete as you have in the building in New York. And when they are not refurbished, when they are really raw, when you still have the electric things falling from the ceiling. And then we had to take poles to put lamps, but we take these poles and wrap them around the columns. So every details were connected to something, really raw, really brutal. I mean, when you have this kind of gaffer tape, or it was not chain, because chain was too obvious, but you have this kind of belt which is stretched around the columns. When you had the poles, when some poles which no lamps on the top, it was created to integrate the light and the sound and the seat and the risers in only one united aesthetic of rawness. And because of rawness, definitely, and because of the rhythm that you can see, you don't see somebody walking straight, you see somebody having to have angled and crossing the girls on different places. It means that the ladies has to always take care of who is coming in front of them. So every Instagram was different. The video was hyper interesting because it took this feeling of chaos opposed to the fluidity and beauty of the dress. This is what I can say until now about our experience with Han and his brand Self-Portrait. This is a very interesting example of the focusing and on one aesthetic, the way to listen to what somebody you trust, and this exchange together to a very young brand, very successful, to a more experienced old man, which was me. Thank you.